Number 3. What scripture is used to say elders serve for a lifetime? If a leadership is no longer effective, why can't the congregation have an elder step down? That's a bold question. It's a bold question. It's hard to answer. It's really, really hard to answer. I'll show you a couple of scriptures, and then I'll give you a couple of issues and a couple of instances, or at least one instance that I know about. And then I'll tell you, we'll leave it there. 3 John, verses 9 and 10. Perhaps the second most infamous person in the New Testament after Judas. 3 John, verse 9. The Apostle John, who at the beginning of the letter identifies himself as the elder, says, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, and I've heard preachers say, he's a Diotrephes. But Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words. And not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive the brethren either, and he forbids those who desire to do so and puts them out of the church. Now I want to point out a couple of really interesting things here. First of all, the situation is not perfectly clear, but it's clear enough. Is Diotrephes an elder? Is Diotrephes a preacher? Is Diotrephes a preacher who set himself up as the controller of the congregation? We don't know. But we do know he is exercising control of at least one congregation and maybe an area. Who knows how large his influence is. But he is exercising, number one, unbiblical control, but he's exercising his unbiblical control in an evil, wicked way. And John does not give the congregation there any means of undoing it. And that's astounding. That's astounding that John doesn't say, now here's the procedure that you follow to get Diotrephes out of power. That's not what he says. Doesn't mean there's not one, but it's not what he says. But what he does say, when I come, I will call attention to his deeds. John says, when I come, I'm going to address this problem. I'm going to address this situation. So John does see a solution, but the solution he sees, he's taking responsibility for. Doesn't give us a lot of help in what to do with an elder. But here we're talking about a person who is engaged in evil and wickedness. This is way beyond inability to effectively serve. Way beyond that. Go with me to 1 Timothy chapter 5, where we see that complaints against elders have very strict instructions. And we looked at this. This is where we started. This is where we ended this morning. 1 Timothy chapter 5, but we're going a verse further than we did this morning. The elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. For the Scripture says, you shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing, and the laborer is worthy of his wages. Notice verse 19. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. We'll stop right there. We're going to get verse 20 in a second. But he says, complaints or accusations against elders are extremely serious. And you don't even listen to one if there isn't more than one witness. You don't even let the information enter your ear, Timothy, unless there's more than one witness. That's a high standard. It's a very high standard, and it's a message to us that the church is supposed to be very careful about how it complains or what it accuses elders of. But look at verse 20. Those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful of sinning. So, John says, when I come, I will address this situation. Timothy says, and whether or not he's still talking about elders or whether he's talking about sin in particular, it certainly seems to apply to elders in verse 20. He says, if somebody is engaged in sin, you have to handle it publicly if you can't handle it privately. And that takes us back to Matthew 18 and the process. You go to them, then you take witnesses, then you go to the church. So it would be the same process. It could be applied to elders as well, or to an elder as well, with sin, with wickedness. Okay? It's a huge difference than a person is old. Leaders answer to God. Elders answer to God. Followers are supposed to submit to their leaders. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17 says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable for you. Okay? If there's an elder who's not doing a good job, if there's an elder who is ignoring his task, and I have heard that said plenty of times in plenty of congregations, they're going to give an account. They're going to give an account. They're going to stand before judgment, and they're going to account for every soul entrusted to their care. And it is an amazingly heavy burden that sits on these men. And people taking pot shots and sniping at them behind their backs and assuming they know things that they don't know just makes it worse. It makes it practically unbearable. But whether people snipe at them and take pot shots at them and undercut them and try to counteract them or not, they're still going to have to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account. Not to you and me, but to God in heaven, the head of the church. It's an amazingly heavy burden. And that is the main avenue in Scripture to hold people accountable. I knew of a situation one time, less than 500 miles from here, but more than 50 miles from here. More than 5 years ago, but less than 50 years ago. Where there was an elder who had repeatedly acted inappropriately and mistreated members of the congregation. And one of the other elders wrote him a letter, and he detailed these things that he had done. And he told the elder, he said, you're going to have to step down or I'm going to take this in front of the church. And the other elder stepped down, moved to another congregation, and started telling everybody how bad the old congregation was. And the elder who did that, by the few people who knew about it, was roundly criticized. And a lot of preachers and a lot of other elders thought it was the wrong thing to do because of the deference that's given to elders by the church. It's why it's important that the church has elders who are men who are above reproach, prudent, temperate, not pugnacious, good managers of people, because they carry an extremely important responsibility. and they carry it for as long as God keeps them in place. And we don't get to choose. God chooses. And that's the point I was trying to make last week.